Racist cop arrests the wrong man, then learns. He just made the biggest mistake of his life. It was a sweltering July afternoon in Eastbrook, a town where the sidewalks cracked under the weight of forgotten promises, and the air always seemed a little too heavy with unspoken tension. Officer Daniel Monroe adjusted his sunglasses, the metal of his badge glinting under the sun as he stood beside his cruiser outside a corner convenience store. He'd worked this neighborhood for nearly 15 years, knew every street, every alley, knew who belonged and who didn't. Or at least he thought he did. That's when he saw him. A young black man, tall, hoodie pulled over his head despite the heat, hands shoved in his pockets, walking briskly past the store. Something about the way he moved, the way he didn't look at Daniel, made the officer's suspicion flicker to life. "Possible suspect," he muttered into his radio, eyes narrowing. "Matches the description. I'm going in." There had been a string of robberies in the area. Nothing violent, just petty theft. But the tension in the department was high. Pressure from the captain, pressure from the press. And Daniel, well, he needed a win. He pulled the cruiser up sharply beside the young man, stepping out before the car even came to a full stop. "You! Stop right there!" The man turned slowly, calmly, confused. "Is there a problem, officer?" Daniel's eyes scanned him. Slim build, dark hoodie, black jeans. Yeah, he thought, he fits. "Hands where I can see them. Turn around. Now." "Wait, what?" "What did I do?" the man asked, voice steady but clearly shaken. Daniel didn't answer. He already had the cuffs in his hand. "You're under arrest for suspicion of robbery. You have the right to remain silent." "Robbery? I didn't rob anyone. I'm just on my way to my sister's place. I haven't done anything." "Tell it to the judge," Daniel muttered, tightening the cuffs around his wrists. The young man's name was Malik Thompson, 27 years old, honor graduate from a nearby university, working 2 jobs while taking care of his younger sister since their parents passed away. But none of that mattered in that moment. All Daniel saw was someone who fit the description. As Daniel shoved him into the back of the cruiser, Malik's eyes locked on his. There was no rage, no screaming, just a quiet disbelief, a hurt so deep it pierced through the bravado of every badge and baton Daniel ever carried. Back at the precinct, everything started to unravel. The store clerk, shaken and tired, looked at Malik through the one-way glass and hesitated. I don't think that's him," he said slowly. "The guy who robbed us, he was shorter and had a scar under his eye. This kid, this isn't him." Daniel's jaw clenched. "Are you sure?" "Yeah," the clerk nodded. "Pretty sure." Minutes later, surveillance footage came in, crystal clear. The suspect wasn't Malik. Daniel stood in the stunned silence as the video played. The man in the footage looked nothing like the one sitting and holding. Similar clothes, maybe, but everything else was off. Completely off. He'd arrested the wrong man. When Daniel returned to the holding cell, Malik was sitting quietly on the bench, head tilted back against the wall, eyes closed. Daniel unlocked the door but didn't speak for a moment. His voice came out lower than usual. "You're free to go." Malik opened his eyes slowly, standing up. "That's it?" he asked, his voice heavy. "You yank me off the street, cuff me like a criminal, throw me in here, and now you just say, 'You're free to go'?" Daniel said nothing. Malik shook his head and walked past him, each step echoing off the cold walls of the precinct. But before he reached the exit, he turned. "You didn't see a suspect today," he said, voice calm, but with a fire underneath. "You saw a black man in a hoodie? That's all it took. That's all it ever takes for people like you." And then he was gone. That night, Daniel sat alone in his kitchen, a glass of whiskey untouched in his hand. The silence in the room felt heavier than usual. He thought about Malik's face, about his voice, about the way he hadn't even raised it, even while being humiliated. His wife, Karen, walked in quietly and placed a hand on his shoulder. "You okay?" Daniel shook his head. "I messed up," he whispered. "I really messed up." But what haunted him most wasn't the mistake. It was the fact that, deep down, he didn't question himself until the footage told him to. How many times had he made assumptions without even realizing? How many times had he looked at someone and judged them before a single word was exchanged? The next morning, news of the wrongful arrest was already making rounds online. A bystander had filmed the arrest. Malik's face pressed against the hood of the cruiser, the confusion in his voice, and now it was viral. The comments were brutal. Just another day in America. That cop should be suspended. Malik deserves justice. The department launched an internal review. Daniel's badge didn't feel like a symbol of protection anymore. It felt like a weight. But what hit him hardest wasn't the backlash. It was the knock on his door that evening. When he opened it, Malik was standing there. Daniel froze. "I don't want your apology," Malik said quietly. "I just want you to see something." He handed Daniel a folded piece of paper. It was a photo. Malik and his little sister Maya, smiling in front of their apartment. "She cried herself to sleep last night," Malik added, "because she thought her big brother wouldn't come home." Daniel's throat tightened. "I'm not the guy you think I am," he said, his voice cracking slightly. "But maybe I've become him." Malik didn't respond. He just turned and walked away. And Daniel was left standing in the doorway, photo in hand, realizing that maybe the biggest mistake of his life wasn't just arresting the wrong man. It was not seeing the man in front of him at all. For days after Malik handed him that photo, Officer Daniel Monroe couldn't sleep. The image of that smiling boy and his younger sister haunted him. Not because of guilt alone, but because it shattered the story he'd always told himself about who he was. He wasn't a bad cop. He'd never used slurs, never raised a hand without cause. He told himself he was fair, that he saw people, not color. But now he saw the cracks, hairline fractures in the mirror he'd held up to his own conscience. He had seen Malik and made a decision in under 3 seconds. And it was the wrong one. The department was scrambling to contain the fallout. The precinct issued a statement calling it a procedural misstep. Daniel was pulled off street duty temporarily. There was talk of retraining and community outreach, but it all sounded like damage control. One afternoon, the captain called him into his office. "You're lucky Malik Thompson isn't pressing charges," the captain said, rubbing his temples. "But this doesn't go away just because it didn't end up in court." Daniel nodded, jaw clenched. He wanted to say something. But what? That he knew he screwed up? That he was sorry? That it wasn't about policies or training manuals, but something deeper, something he hadn't wanted to admit lived inside him? Instead, he just sat there, silent. "Go home," the captain finally said. "Figure out who you want to be when this all blows over." But Daniel wasn't sure who that was anymore. The next week, Malik's story hit the local newspaper. Not just about the arrest, but about his life, how he was working part-time at a community youth center while studying for his master's degree in social work. The article painted a picture not of a victim, but a mentor, a protector, a man fighting to give his sister the life he never had. Daniel read every word twice. Later that day, he found himself parked across the street from the youth center. He wasn't even sure why. Habit, maybe, or guilt, or both. He watched from his car as Malik came out, laughing with a group of kids, showing one of them how to dribble a basketball. The same young man he'd shoved into a squad car a week earlier now looked like the only person in this town actually doing something that mattered. Daniel felt a strange knot forming in his chest. He got out of the car. "Hey," he called awkwardly as he approached. Malik turned, his smile fading slightly when he recognized him. "I'm not here in uniform," Daniel said quickly, holding up his hands. "I'm just me." "All right," Malik replied, guarded. "I read the article," Daniel continued, "about what you do here, the work you're doing with these kids." Malik didn't respond, just studied him quietly. "I guess I just wanted to say, it opened my eyes, more than you probably realize." Malik crossed his arms. "You're not the first person to judge me by my skin, officer. You won't be the last. But that doesn't mean I have time to educate everyone who decides I look like trouble." "I know," Daniel said, "and I'm not asking you to. I'm just trying to understand how I got so far off track without even noticing." A long silence passed between them. Then Malik spoke. "Understanding is a start, but it doesn't change what you did. Doesn't erase the way my sister looked at me that night, like the world isn't safe for people who look like us." Daniel's voice dropped. I want to do better, not just say the right words or take another training course. I want to learn how to listen, how to unlearn whatever it is that made me see you as a suspect instead of a person. Malik paused, then nodded slowly. Then show up, he said simply. Not here for me, for them. He gestured toward the kids. You want to help? Help them. That's how you change this. That's how you change you. The next week, Daniel did something he never thought he would. He signed up as a volunteer at the youth center. No badge, no uniform. Just him, a clipboard, and 100 ways to feel out of place. At first, the kids were wary. Some stared, some avoided him. One asked bluntly, "Ain't you the cop from the video?" Daniel didn't lie. "Yeah," he said, I still am. But I'm here to learn how to be something better." And over time, things started to shift. He helped tutor a few kids after school, played pickup games on the weekends, sat in on workshops about race, identity, and bias, led by people he would have never listened to a month ago. He didn't talk much. Mostly he listened. And in that listening, something changed. Not just in how he saw others, but how he saw himself. One evening, as the center was closing up, Malik approached him again. "You've been showing up," he said. "I said I would," Daniel replied. "I didn't think you would." Daniel smiled faintly. "Neither did I." Malik looked at him for a moment. "You know, this work, this kind of change, it's not quick. It's not clean. It's slow, messy, exhausting." Daniel nodded. "Feels a lot like police work, if we were doing it right." Malik chuckled, then turned serious again. "I still don't forgive what happened that day," he said quietly, "but I respect that you're trying to make it mean something more." And for the first time in weeks, Daniel felt a small weight lift off his shoulders. Not absolution, not closure, but the first brick removed from a wall he'd helped build his whole life. Months passed. Daniel's suspension ended, but something in him had changed permanently. He no longer walked into the precinct with the same unshakable certainty. He questioned more, spoke up more, mentored younger officers on what not to do, even when it made him unpopular. And every Thursday night, he still showed up at the youth center. Not because it fixed what he did, but because it reminded him what kind of man he still wanted to become. In the end, this wasn't a story about a good cop gone bad or a bad cop redeemed. It was about what happens when someone finally stops mistaking silence for neutrality and starts listening instead of defending. And for Daniel Monroe, the biggest mistake of his life wasn't arresting the wrong man. It was thinking he had nothing left to learn. But now, he was learning, one Thursday at a time. If you enjoy this story, like, comment, and subscribe to the channel.